After announcing a 25% tariff on his friend India, quote unquote, plus a penalty for buying Russian weapons and oil, Donald Trump has said that the US had struck a trade deal with Pakistan, including plans to develop its massive oil reserves. A disgruntled Trump also took a shot at India, and he said, and I quote him, "Maybe they, that is Pakistan, will sell oil to India," unquote, over the continued purchase of Russian oil despite sanctions on Moscow for its war on Ukraine. In a Truth Social post last night, Donald Trump appeared to blame India and China for funding by buying Russian crude, a conflict he once boasted he could end within 24 hours of taking oath. A disgruntled American president also slammed the Indian economy, the fourth largest in the world, ladies and gentlemen, as dead after failing to persuade New Delhi to open its dairy and agriculture markets. Meanwhile, Trump's strike has triggered a major political clash in India, with Rahul Gandhi taunting the government over Trump's snub. But there is a twist. Rahul Gandhi's own party colleagues and allies are not on the same page with him. Here's the story, and then I bring in the guests.
First came the tariff, then the tirade. A day after slapping a whopping 25% tariffs on imports from India, Donald Trump dropped another bombshell. Hitting out at India and Russia, he wrote on his Truth Social, "I don't care what India does with Russia. They can take their dead economies down together for all I care." However, he has also affirmed that Prime Minister Modi is a friend and US is still in talks with India.
Prime Minister Modi is a friend of mine, but they don't do very much business in terms of business with us. They sell a lot to us, but we don't buy from them. You know why? Because the tariff is so high. They have one of the highest tariffs in the world. Now they're willing to cut it very substantially, but we'll see what happens. We're talking to India now. We'll see what happens. It doesn't matter too much whether we have a deal or whether we charge them a certain tariff, but you'll know at the end of this week.
24 hours later, Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal's address in the Parliament on tariff issue.
सरकार हमारे किसानों, श्रमिकों, एंटरप्रेन्योर्स, उद्यमी, निर्यातकों, सूक्ष्म लघु और मध्यम उद्योगों और उद्योग जगत के सभी हितधारकों के कल्याण की रक्षा और संवर्धन को सर्वोच्च महत्व देती है। हम अपने राष्ट्रीय हितों को सुरक्षित करने और आगे बढ़ाने के लिए सभी आवश्यक कदम उठाएंगे।
Shortly after Trump's dead economy post, leader of opposition Rahul Gandhi ran away with it.
Everybody knows that the Indian economy is a dead economy. I'm glad that President Trump has stated a fact.
Rahul's bid to target the BJP government and the Prime Minister using Trump's dead economy remark backfired immediately, with his party colleagues and allies taking an opposite stand.
It may be just a bargaining tactic. As you know, the trade negotiations are still going on. And therefore, there is a possibility that in the course of negotiations, this may come down. I wish our negotiators good luck and good courage, because we can't afford to buckle under. We have to keep our national interests as number one.
तो हमारी आर्थिक स्थिति कहीं से भी कमजोर नहीं है, तो इसलिए हम आर्थिक रूप से कोई हमें कहे कि हमें खत्म कर देगा, उसकी गलत फहमी है। तो ट्रंप की गलत फहमी जी रहा।
और सर इम्पोज किया जो
टैरिफ की तो मैंने आलोचना की कि ये गलत है। टैरिफ इम्पोज करना हर देश को अधिकार है कि किसके साथ व्यापार करे, उसमें इस तरह रोक लगाना, ब्रिक्स के खिलाफ बोलना, रशिया से इम्पोर्ट के खिलाफ, बिजनेस के खिलाफ बोलना, ये उनका जो है कतई उचित नहीं है।
Slamming the dead economy remark, Congress ally Shiv Sena Uddhav Thackeray's Member of Parliament Priyanka Chaturvedi wrote, and I quote, "Calling it a dead economy can only come from a position of arrogance or ignorance." BJP leadership was quick to taunt the confusion in the opposition camp, comparing Shashi Tharoor and Rahul Gandhi. On a social media post, BJP's K. Annamalai wrote, "One spoke for India's interest and the other spoke in a tone that would please his offshore masters." Amid intensifying politics over tariffs, Trump reiterates India as a friend, but not ready to accept India-Russia bonhomie at the same time. Back-channel talks and negotiations are on, but the question remains, will there be a breakthrough? With Abhishek Datta, Bureau Report, NDTV.
And let me bring in our panelists now. Nilesh Shah is Managing Director at Kotak Mahindra Asset Management. We have Lisa Curtis, Director for Indo-Pacific Security at the Center for a New American Security, and Jayant Krishna is Senior Fellow, Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. Ms. Curtis, beginning with you, 25% tariff announcement and then sanctions on 6 Indian oil companies. As someone who is advised on national security under Trump, is this economic coercion or calculated pressure, and what might be the strategic objective here?
Well, I think it's clear that President Trump is playing hardball with India on the trade talks, but I think it's surprising. We all thought that the trade talks were going well, that the announcement of a deal was imminent. So now that Trump is coming out with this very harsh rhetoric, I think it's quite surprising. And he may feel emboldened. He just got a deal that was pretty favorable to the United States with Japan. So he may feel emboldened to try to get more from India than apparently was on the table. But I think this is risky because the U.S.-India strategic partnership is very important. The Trump administration should understand that the ag sector is very sensitive in India, and that Prime Minister Modi is not going to do something that could really hurt him in his domestic political position. There seemed to be understanding of that early in the trade talks, but for some reason, I think we now see that President Trump is really not in the mood to make concessions with India. And so we have to see what happens. The only positive thing we can say is that U.S. negotiators will be going to India at the end of August. And so there is a chance that even though we won't see a trade deal by August 1st, that we could see a trade deal later. And so that these 25% tariffs could potentially be short-lived on India.
Nilesha, how do you assess the immediate impact on India's markets, energy prices and investor sentiments? Are we heading into a phase of economic retaliation and volatility?
So it's always difficult to predict President Trump. And in US market, techo trade is a popular term. As Ms. Curtis mentioned, it's difficult to understand why, despite long-term alignment of strategic interest, US has acted. Maybe it's hardball tactic. Today, we are the fastest growing major economy. We have $700 billion of reserve. Majority of that is invested in US. And we have ability to absorb short-term pain. But at the same time, we must continue to engage with US and bring one important aspect for their consideration. Bulk of US software is made in India, written in India, programmed in India. And they don't have to worry about any cybersecurity risk, any bugs. If this was written in China, they would have carried a huge security risk. So somewhere we need to bring security risk into play and convince US that our long-term strategic interests are aligned.
Okay. So talking about that strategic interest here, Jayant Krishna, here is Donald Trump branding India and Russia as dead economies. This is not only factually off base, but certainly, diplomatically provocative as well. Do such statements risk damaging bipartisan trust in the US on India? And how should policymakers in Washington and Delhi recalibrate the narrative now?
See, Maria, what has happened, the kind of utterances which have come from President Trump are really unfortunate. Since a very long time, for almost last 20 years or so, India and US have been, strategic partners, for a variety of reasons. There's an expanding Indian market where US has access interest and export interest. We are seen as perhaps the best alternate supply chain destination after China, which positions India very, very favorably. Indian diaspora in the US is very strong. A friendship with India would also address the Chinese economic aggression. But despite all these factors, I think the kind of that we have seen, they are really unfortunate. First of all, US may be the world's largest economy, but we surely don't need a rating from them as to how our economy is doing. You look at the International Monetary Fund, you look at the World Bank. World Bank still feels that next year we'll grow at about 6.4%. Last year our growth was of the same order. IMF sees India as one of the shining stars in terms of our economic performance. If you look at Moody's ratings, we are Baa3, which shows positive and stable. If you look at S&P, if you look at DBRS, so I think we have testimonials from a lot of people who really matter, who study economics. Not that there are no chinks in the armor. There are lots of areas of improvement in our economy as well. But to say that we are a dead economy, I think it shows his frustration completely because the trade talks were in progress and somehow he didn't even wait for the August 11 deadline and he announced this 25% tariff and penalty even before that. Or it could be a very, very negative tactics on the negotiation table that you say a lot of adverse things, about India buying oil and defense equipment from Russia, and our economy is not being doing well, and so on and so forth. And then India's partner on the negotiation table will be weakened, and then they will sign on the dotted line. Well, India would not do that very clearly. India cannot do it. It's a pretty strong economy, and it knows it's our interest. And India, Maria, has been willing to lower the import duty on a variety of products. The pressure from the industry notwithstanding, India is prepared that protectionism, which has been the guiding principle of our economy and the trade policy for a long period, India is willing to lower that. In many categories, it has already lowered. But the interest of farmers and dairy industry, that's an area where a lot of hapless, lot of poor and marginal farmers, who don't even have sustenance level income. Yes. If their interest is to be safeguarded, then India cannot succumb at all, and it must not succumb at all. I think. But having said so, I don't think it's time for India to retaliate because it will not be in good taste. And I think we should, if at all, we should try all what it takes to fast track the negotiations. And even if a full BTA can't be announced that early, even a mini deal must be looked at the earliest. So that the effect of this 25% tariff plus penalty doesn't really apply for us beyond a few days.
And Nilesh, despite these provocative statements coming in from the US president, there has been a great degree of caution, measured response that has come in from India. Here is Trump asserting that India is a dead economy and it flies in the face of India's 8% plus GDP growth. But does it still have the power to spook foreign investors, especially those sitting on the fence about long-term capital allocation into India?
So it will be difficult to make an assessment, because if we see transcript of conference call by major global companies, invariably they have devoted a time and explanation about their India strategy. We will become third largest economy in near future. No country, no company will be able to ignore us. So my feeling is that undoubtedly we have to give red carpet treatment to investors, both domestic and foreigner. Our market is fairly large on the domestic side, and eventually every investor will have a look at India. It's our job to ensure that we lay a red carpet for them by accelerating our ease of doing business.
Okay. So, Lisa Curtis, here is Donald Trump sanctioning Indian energy firms, and this is coming at a time when the US perhaps needs India as a key Indo-Pacific partner, and that this entire motive or goal seems self-defeating now, Could this escalate into a wider diplomatic rift, ma'am? And how should New Delhi then recalibrate its foreign policy if such actions become a trend under the second presidency of Donald Trump?
Well, I think President Trump's statements, particularly the one about India's economy being a dead economy, are unfortunate and they're short-sighted. India is an important strategic partner of the United States. And I think what this points to is a larger problem in how the Trump administration is pursuing these trade agreements. They are very narrowly focusing on tariffs, where they should be looking at the broader relationship. And these, trade negotiations should fit into their broader national security strategy. And we can't boil everything down to tariffs. When you look at bilateral relationships that the United States has with allies or important partners like India, they rest on economics, they rest on military cooperation, they rest on political cooperation, and being sensitive to the strategic concerns of that strategic partner. So I think what I would hope to see is a broader approach to the relationship with India. And also the recognition that U.S.-India ties were already strained. Before these trade problems, you have the aftermath of the India-Pakistan conflict and Trump's comments about mediating on Kashmir, Trump inviting Pakistan's Field Marshal, Chief of Army Staff, Asim Munir to the Oval Office. Mm-hmm. These are things that are irritating to India. And so to add on top of this, some of these very acerbic comments on his Truth Social post is not helping the overall relationship. And I think this is a mistake by the Trump administration. And I think when you look at the comments about India's reliance on Russian energy, well, that is an area that I think India could take some steps. India did not traditionally rely on Russian energy imports. It's only been since Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the fact that India can get those energy imports so cheap that India really now heavily relies on Russian energy imports. So I do believe India could shift away, it could reduce its reliance on Russian energy without tremendous harm to its economy. There may be some short-term pain, but I think if this is a negotiating tactic, if President Trump has put this issue on the table as a negotiating tactic, I think this is an area where India could actually move and could make a concession, rather than the ag sector, which I think is extremely politically difficult for Prime Minister Modi.
Jayant Krishna, what's your reading? Are we looking at a collapse of the strategic economic consensus which has been built over the last 2 decades? Because you have long championed India as a reliable global partner and manufacturing base, but how should India navigate this sudden escalation? Should it retaliate, negotiate, or diversify, away from U.S. dependency, especially in energy and exports?
See, Maria, I think, retaliation is not the best strategy. And India culturally has not been a country which has been retaliating. I think we, whatever it takes to fast track, the negotiations, I think we should do. And I don't think it is a collapse of diplomacy. It's a collapse of the relationship. I don't think I see it more of an aberration, rather than a collapse at all. And I'll be very honest, India can't even afford to do that. If you look at US is India's second largest trading partner. The largest FDI India gets from any country is the US, right? It is the biggest FDI investor in the country. US has a trade, deficit in favor of India. There are not too many countries with whom we have exporting, which we have a trading relationship, where there is an import surplus in favor of India, right? So I think there's a trade surplus in favor of India. So I think looking at all this, I think US and India are far too strategic. And having said so, whatever President Trump has said, temperamentally, he's known to make, these kind of statements. But the fact is, the negotiators on the US side and the negotiators on the India side, they understand the larger picture, and they do, and I have every hope that they would see, that if there is expediency, if there is a fast tracking of the negotiations, then I think there could be some solution out without compromising on the core principles of agriculture and dairy area, but everybody everywhere else. See, India also has to realize, Maria, one thing is very, very clear, that, our import duty structure has been one of the highest the world over. That's the truth. When President Trump says that, it's not an incorrect statement, right? I think we have to be, no matter how much our industry cries for protectionism, the fact is the Make in India mission of the Prime Minister can only succeed riding on the wave of, developing manufacturing competitiveness, improving the ease of doing business, removing the regulatory uncertainty that we have in the country, rather than, having, riding on, somehow balancing on the calipers of high import duty. So I think, where negotiations are always about give and take, right? I mean, it's not that any country wins absolutely. Somewhere we have to give in, somewhere we have to, stand to our, not deviate from the stand that India has taken. And I'm sure there'll be a solution. And I somehow feel, this 25% tariff plus penalty that he's talking about, which he hasn't specified what's the amount, I think wouldn't really be there for long, and because it's a lot at stake at all, because India has a huge export surplus with the US. So I think we should do everything that it takes without retaliating in the same tone, or a retaliatory tariff, or any of the coercive measures. That I don't think that's the character of India at all. We should fast track the negotiations, to my mind, and that's the best way out.
All right, Nilesha, Jayant Krishna and Lisa Curtis, really appreciate your time here on NDTV. Let me bring in Mark Linscott now. He is a senior advisor for trade policy at the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum, focusing on Donald Trump's recent statements now. Mr. Linscott, Donald Trump has once again targeted India over what he calls, quote-unquote, unfairly high tariffs, claiming that the US has done relatively little business with India. Today we saw penalties also on oil companies. Given your role in fostering US-India trade relations, how do you respond to this kind of characterization, of relatively little business? Is it factually grounded, or one may ask, politically convenient?
Well, I think this is a bit of a low point in the U.S.-India trade relationship. It's hard to get around that, and hopefully there's only one direction now, which is up. We'll see. We will have reciprocal tariffs announced tomorrow. We'll see if there are any new announcements related to penalties. Hopefully not. I think that certainly would complicate the situation. India is not alone. There will be reciprocal tariffs, and I think higher reciprocal tariffs against some other countries. There's already 50% that's been announced with Brazil. But this is a very different scenario than many of us hoped, certainly a couple of weeks ago, and even as recently as last week. There had seemed to be good prospects for a trade deal. There had been multiple statements from the administration, even from the president himself, but additionally, Secretary Bessent and Kevin Hassett and Secretary Letnick, that a deal was very close. So it's truly unfortunate that we are at this point. I do think that what has been a missing component in this negotiation in the run-up to announcement of reciprocal tariffs is there's been no direct engagement between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi. It's been clear that President Trump is trade negotiator in chief, and every single one of the deals he's announced, whether it's been with the EU or with Japan or South Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, etc., has involved his direct engagement with his foreign leader counterpart, or directly with the trade minister involved. He's showed he's willing to negotiate directly with those. So that's been missing with India. I think if that had happened, there would have been better prospects for a deal. And unfortunately, we're at this moment when things are not looking so good.
Okay, Mr. Linscott, Donald Trump, of course, recently, in fact, today, he clubbed India and Russia together, saying both economies are dead. From your vantage point, how do such sweeping statements, factually incorrect statements, these are lies, impact investor confidence and bilateral strategic trust, especially when trade between the two nations had actually grown in recent years?
Well, hopefully the impact is minimal and only temporary. And we certainly have many instances in the past in which the president can change course on a dime. Next week we could have situations in which he's more positive on the U.S.-India relationship, particularly if there is that kind of direct communication between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump. And I recognize with the posts he's made over the last 2 days, it makes it more difficult to pick up the phone. But that could make a real difference. But it does complicate things to have these posts. I hope we have developments that will clear the air, that will allow the negotiations to continue, and hopefully there still is a prospect for a deal in the short term.
But given the nature of comments that have come from Donald Trump, they are inflammatory and unpleasant. It is being seen as pressure tactics as well. These phrases are never used in international negotiations and diplomatic commentaries. And of course, when you say that he is the negotiator in chief, then how can there be a call between the two leaders at all because of the comments which has come only recently? I mean, as early as few hours ago.
I mean, there's no doubt that the comments have been inflammatory. I think unfortunate for the relationship, and they definitely make it more difficult to have that direct communication. And essentially, that is an assessment that the Indian government, the Modi administration, will have to make, whether they've been just too far beyond the pale to allow for that direct communication. But if it does happen, it could make a very positive impact. Again, we've seen instances in the past in which the president responds quite positively to that kind of engagement. But I recognize that it's more complicated, it's more difficult to do that at this point.
All right, Mark Linscott, really appreciate your time.